Welcome to Banyen Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyen.com. Since 1970, Banyen Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyen.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy.
Hello and welcome. My name is Jacob Steele, the events manager for Banyen Books and Sound. Today we're delighted to be hosting Bill Arnott, discussing his books Gone Viking 1 and Gone Viking 2. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that although we have participants joining from around the world, the physical location of Banyen Books is on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Bill Arnott is a songwriter, poet, and author of the best-selling travelogue Gone Viking, a Travel Saga, and Gone Viking 2, Beyond Boundaries, as well as Dramamania and Wonderful Magical Words. His work has been published in literary journals in Canada, the US, UK, Europe, Asia, and Australia. And his column, Bill Arnott's Beat, is a feature in several magazines. Bill has received awards for prose, poetry, and songwriting, and is the creator of Bill's Artist Showcase. For his 8-year Gone Viking expedition, he was awarded a fellowship in London's Royal Geographical Society. This evening, he'll be discussing his Gone Viking series, which guides us on an epic literary odyssey following history's most feared and misunderstood voyageurs, the Vikings. The series has been described as perfect books for the armchair explorer. You can learn more about his work at billarnott.wordpress.com. So without further ado, we're delighted to welcome Bill Arnott. Thanks for coming.
Jacob, thank you very much for having me, and my appreciation to Banyen Books and Sound, one of my favorite stores, as you said, in the Kitsilano region, community or neighborhood of Vancouver. And I'm also in Vancouver, just across one of our many bridges. And this is Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh land, where I'm broadcasting from as well, in a high-rise in downtown Vancouver. We were visiting before the presentation, and I was saying to Jacob how excited I am, my wife and I, to be moving back to the Kitsilano region of Vancouver. And yeah, a huge privilege to be chatting with you tonight about the Gone Viking travel logs. And I've been delighted that we've got some literary awards. The books are part of Banyen Books' gorgeous selection of travel logs and travel memoirs. And really this first book, I'll share some things with you from both books, Gone Viking, a Travel Saga, and Gone Viking 2, Beyond Boundaries. And really, I started off with the whole premise, and you may be aware of this, but if not, that word Viking was originally a verb. It meant to go voyaging. The Scandinavian people would use the term, they would go a Viking or to go Viking. And so I'm playing off the fact that Viking originally meant going voyaging. And a lot of those Western European scribes, traditionally it would be monks either around Germany or the UK, that began writing about these voyageurs, these travelers, capitalized that word into Vikings with a capital V, and we came to use it to label a people. So I spent, as Jacob mentioned, 8 years initially traveling around a lot of the northern hemisphere, that top half of the planet, basically trekking after or traveling in the wake or the footsteps of these Scandinavian voyageurs, the Vikings. And it's been a series of expeditions. I would go travel for 1, 2, 3, 4 months, come home, do some additional research and writing, And that's what prompted these travel memoirs. And let's jump into things right off the bat. I'm going to start reading a little bit for you. I've got some fun photos from the expeditions I'll share with you as well as we go. And as Jacob said, please feel free to ask questions. Get them in that chat stream. We'll have lots of chance to visit to the best of our ability, a little bit once removed. But yeah, this will be as interactive as you care to make it. And as I say, it's a privilege to be sharing these nonfiction, these very real, very personal stories with you tonight. So I'll start by reading from Gone Viking, a travel saga. And I figure the prologue sets a certain tone and sets the premise for this whole series of adventures. And the prologue goes like this. And I'm going to use the word sculls with a C, like those slender rowing boats that if you're in Greater Vancouver, you see them around the rowing club and going up and down False Creek quite often as well. So here we go, the prologue to Gone Viking, a travel saga. Sculls slice the bay, the softest splash in morning calm. Each stroke of oar swirls water into quotes, grasping at a poem, the reach and pull, a heartbeat. They do that on the Rideau, someone says. A coxswain barks instructions. The boats move on, silent save for an oarlock creak and gentle ripple of wake. Through this, a bald eagle flies close enough to hear feathers moving air. While at a sculpture park, it states, when you see an eagle, you know this is a special place. Last time I was as taken by the view, it was nighttime. Winter Olympics were here, and we met new friends at the rowing club pub, facing this stretch of water that resembles a thumb on the mitt of the inlet. Large windows and a patio look onto Vancouver's Coal Harbour, cruise ship terminal, and the industrial port's towering cranes. An Olympic cauldron anchored the scene, a pyramid of metallic beams crisscrossed into outsized kindling, a signal beacon burning proud. The fiery glow dampened city lights, leaving only flame visible dancing on dark water, the look of a Viking funeral. Now, for those of you around Greater Vancouver, you probably are familiar, you know that cauldron from our 2010 Winter Olympics, that Jack Pool Plaza. And, you know, when it's dark and the flame is going, it is a striking visual, especially from the head of the inlet right by Stanley Park there. So I'm going to continue reading from Gone Viking, the first book. And let's start with this section. It's called Viking, aptly enough. My journey begins with a pint, another pub on a pier, this time seated on a timber dock. Sun's glazing the water, surrounding me in radiance like I'm seated in a forge. Inspiring setting, beautiful day. And I'm formulating a travel plan, a trail north, east, and west, envisioning waves and ice and mountains. The scene blurs at the edge like cloud, a winding path romantically ambiguous. I think of the far north and shiver. Why leave this idyllic spot to trek some of the world's most inhospitable places? I ask myself this more than once, the one-word answer invariably the same, Viking. Through translation and time, the words come to label a people, a capitalized noun outside Scandinavia. But the word was first used by those people, describing the pursuit of wealth or land, legacy building quests, known as going a Viking or simply to go Viking. It was a grand tour before rail or the Renaissance, an overseas experience without synthetic packs or Swiss Army knives, just wool and fur, wood and iron, axes as tools and weapons, along with the power of sail, oar, and effort. Going Viking was a rite of passage, a drive as strong as a nomad's pull to migrate. Riches from abroad meant power and the ability to write one's saga, tales of conquest and bravery, the result, immortality. Another pint and my plan takes shape, a trailhead at least, pointing me on my way. The journey, after all, being about departure as much as anything, a sense of discovery. Saxons called it wanderjahr, the equivalent of a student's gap year, travel prior to settling down, education on the road in lieu of a structured workplace. This excursion, evolving as I go, will be my wanderjahr. Multiple trips over several years, in fact, but a wander all the same, Viking in its truest sense, my trail, a personal saga. So I think this is a good time for me to jump into some photos with you. Now, I was asked by someone, I've been privileged to, be at Banyen and some other events recently, and someone said, are you going to wear that helmet I've seen you wear on social media? Of course I will. So I've got this knit woolen Viking helmet. I think it's historically accurate. It's not, but we can discuss that more later. But there, you know who you are. You've satisfied us. You've seen me in the helmet. And thank you to my friend Rita from Burnaby for knitting that fabulous toque/helmet. So I'm going to share some photos with you now. Let's just jump into that. I'll go to my screen share and let's see how we go technologically. Oh, this is what we call in the business product placement. And there's the cover of my books bragging about some of the literary awards. But into our photos. So here's a map. Obviously, here's where I am and Jacob and many of us in around Greater Vancouver. But I arbitrarily chose the start of this excursion and what I'm sharing with you this evening from a place in Denmark. It's the Viking Ship Museum. This is in a town called Roskilde in Denmark. It's just outside of Copenhagen. And they have a marvelous exhibit there with it's a working archaeology anthropology museum, and it's also open to tourists. So it's a very active place. And there was a marvelous map on the wall, and it basically showed where these Scandinavian voyageurs, these Vikings, came and went and raided and traded and settled. And what amazed me was these arrows and these routes, as you can see me wiggling the mouse around here, it covered the top half of the planet. So that was really my eureka moment. I thought, oh my goodness, I want to go to there when there is literally all over a great deal of the globe. So let's jump ahead. I'm going to lower the microscope onto what we might consider some of those key historical areas. If we just lower that in, and there's our Viking Ship Museum in Denmark. And you can see why so much of this exodus would have occurred across that North Sea. We've got Sweden here and Norway, and the current up here in the North Sea and North Atlantic, a lot of it goes that sort of east to west. So whether they were sailing or rowing, you know, it's pretty much a beeline to the British Isles there. We think historically a lot of the Norse would have gone to more of these northern islands, what we now consider Scotland and Ireland and Northumbria, but the Danes also emigrated to great swaths of the UK. And if we really want to go back historically, here's a fun little exercise. If we imagine just inverting this, what if the green was the water and what if the blue was the land, which it was back in the early Bronze Age, late Stone Ages. This was all connected. So we've got Danes and Angles and Saxons, and these were very common means of transhumance, migration. So when we think of the Angles coming from this part of Europe and Angleland, right, Danes and Angles and Saxons making up a great deal of the UK. So I tried to emulate or mimic a lot of those routes. Now, join me if you will. One of the first historical places, you might be familiar with this, called Lindisfarne. Now, that would literally be just up on that northern English coast, just south of the Scottish border there. And in the year 793, one of the first recorded Viking landings in the British Isles. And you can see this great clump of people, and I'm one of that clump of people. It's a tidal crossing. So twice a day, depending on the tide times, you get these clumps of pilgrims or tour buses, and folks scooch out onto this island, Causeway Island, a tidal island, and there's the castle, and then there's a priory as well. And here's just an example. This is St. Michael's Mount, which is down in Cornwall. That's the southwestern corner of England. And here, this photo, it's fairly recent, taken during high tide, but it's got this causeway, which reveals itself twice a day. And when the tide is very low, pilgrims can slosh across in bare feet, and it's a very special place. It's a Benedictine abbey. It's basically a replica. It's much the same as Mont Saint-Michel off the coast of France. And here's a fun one that ties a lot of things together. So from that St. Michael's Mount, I did a lot of trekking around. 100 miles is what I trekked on foot around that southwest toe of the UK as part of my Viking excursions. But from St. Michael's Way, you can go over this Penwith Peninsula, southwest England. But a lot of you might recognize this scallop shell. This is the insignia of the Camino Way. This English footpath, part of the Pilgrimage Way, does link up with those cross-European, those Western European routes that could go to that northwest corner of Spain, the Camino. So there are these tributaries all over the way across Western Europe that connect these key pilgrimage sites. This was a key part of my Viking travels. When I wasn't in a plane or on a train or in a boat, I was on foot following these kinds of paths. And here's a good example of that, down in that southwest corner of England. This is a photo at Carbis Bay. And if that rings a bell, just last summer was where they held the G8 summit and conference. It's a little sleepy seaside town in England. And this is a chunk of old shipwreck. So when tide is low, you see these little bits of what, although that looks like rock, these are also bits of old ship. There's shifting sandy shoals out there, and hundreds of ships over the past couple of millennia have been shipwrecked there. This would have been like a mid-1800s, so mid-19th century steamer that crashed, and then these bits of engine, in this case it's a bit of boiler from a steam engine, lodged in the sand, and they're seemingly fairly permanent. And if we were to turn around on this big, wide, gorgeous beach, 180 degrees, oopsie, we would carry on to the southwest coast path, which leads us all the way to that southwestern toe of England. And what do we got there but Land's End, which to me is very romantic. Now, a lot of these Western European countries, there's Land's End in France, there's Land's End in Spain, beyond that Santiago de Compostela at the end of the Camino Way. And I share this one with you because it brings to our attention the Longship's Lighthouse and the Isles of Scilly, about 30 nautical miles off the coast of England and basically due south of Ireland. And it's sort of the Celtic Sea is starting to mix with the North Atlantic there. Here's some of that coastline, and these are what they call the Longships. And this attractive lighthouse, as I say, again, we're on that southwest corner of England, looking north. There's some pretty rugged seascapes, sea caves, gorgeous topography and coastal paths and vistas. This absolutely would have been either an old Celtic standing stone or even a Roman mile marker when they were here for, well, basically maybe 50 BCE until the 5th century. And you can even see from the shoreline why they would have called these rocks the Longships in the day, when the locals would have been always sort of scouring the horizon to see if folks are coming. They don't know if they're coming for trading or raiding, but always a need for awareness and a watchfulness. There I am on a boat on my way to the Isles of Scilly, so sailed off from Falmouth, a great historical port on the south coast of Cornwall. This is still in England, and this is a pilot cutter that I'm on here, 54-footer, if for those of you that are sailors in the audience, mahogany and teak, a foresail, mainsail, staysail, topsail, and jib, and I was part of a crew of 7. And basically this for me was recreating the watery footsteps of Olaf Crowbone, or Olaf Tryggvason, who became a king of Norway after sort of making his bones, so to speak, around the British Isles. Later on in this journey, I was just on the water for a week in this ship. We hit a force 8, we were racing ahead of a force 8 gale, and our mast snapped right here. So we lost our topsail and it flopped there, kind of like a surrender sign. And we lost our engine as well. So some waves were covering the front half of our ship there. And we were tethered to the deck in survival suits. I'm laughing as though lightheartedly, perhaps it's just nervous recollections, because in the moment it was certainly trying and about as adventurous as I choose or as I'm willing to endure. I certainly wouldn't have chosen that given the choice. Having said that, this is our little 54-footer, a pilot cutter, meaning this boat was built in the 1970s. It's a replica of a ship from the 1850s, and these would ply the Bristol Channel, literally like a pilot cutter. So they would pilot in the big trading vessels that were coming in from all over the world. So they're built for speed. In a pinch, two people can sail it quite effectively. These are on the Isles of Scilly and Scilly, if you're not familiar with it. But we did have some gorgeous weather, as you can see. This is part of the Gulf Stream. So you get naturally occurring palm trees here in the UK. It's rather magical, but the water is still icy cold as far as I'm concerned from a West Coast Canadian perspective, although folks still swim in there. I dipped in there in the middle of summer, right around midsummer, and it was one of the most unpleasant experiences of my life. Having said that, it's still beautiful to look at. Let's go further afield. Let's talk proper Viking, if I can now. Small v and big V. If we carry on from our starting point, there in Denmark and around the UK and the Isles of Scilly, or right in this area, okay, basically the last stop between Ireland and that Land's End of Spain down there. Let's go to Iceland together. Now I'm basically replicating the footsteps of Eric the Red. He was exiled from Norway, had a squabble with his neighbors, but he wasn't big on conflict resolution. He tended to swing first with his axe and worry about problem solving later. So, having taken care of one of his neighbors, disposed of, Eric was banished to Iceland. And let's go there together. Here we are in Reykjavik at a place called the Settlement Museum, and this is the Settlement Saga. This is a gorgeous 800-year-old book. I felt very, very fortunate. It was just me in this exhibit room at that time. It was on loan for a short period of time from the university. And look at this gorgeous, I mean, the script, the monks, because that's who was writing these books in the time. So again, this was started in the 12th century, finished a couple of hundred years later. So, and with this ribbon as original, would be used as a bookmark, but it looks like it's been typeset. Gorgeous, gorgeous font, what they call that illumination, bit of color with like what it's called a drop cap, which is a posh word for a large letter we see at the beginning of a paragraph. Just a spectacular thing. So these are one of the original sagas. The Icelanders were amongst the most prolific writers. So basically, and I don't mean to offend anyone, I liken these to a Bible. There's lineage, there's history, there's speculation, there's myth, there's lessons, but the documents themselves tended to be written a couple of hundred years later. So all of these stories were passed on through oral legend. Oftentimes tattoos on individuals would relay these family lineage and stories, but invariably folks would tie back in their bloodlines to the gods. And I find that somewhat magical and not unlike the Druids, and it's very, very inspiring. And that's why I tried to emulate facets of that saga writing in my own travel memoir stories. And here we are still in Reykjavik, Icelandic capital. This is, yes, a statue of Leif Erikson out front of what's called the Hallgrímskirkja, and that's a Lutheran church. It's the tallest building in town. It's on a rise in the land, and it really looks like a space shuttle on end. But what I love about this, if you want to sort of talk about facets of religion and faith, Iceland converted to Christianity from paganism in the year 1000. Very tidy, turn in the calendar, turn of the national faith. But it was clearly parlayed that folks could worship whoever they wanted to in the privacy of their own home. So it strikes me as very inclusive and with the tolerance and the fact that this Christian church is right near two places called Odensgata and Thorsgata, in other words, Odin's Street and Thor's Avenue. So tying everything together in a tidy geographical manner there. I'll just share a few around Iceland. Now it's popular, it's easy to get to, even now, obviously, as travel restrictions loosen up. Many of you might be familiar with this. In Iceland's Gullfoss Falls, bigger than Niagara, very, very impressive. And also lots of bubbly mud pits and geysers and such. And in Iceland, literally beneath that island is where the North American and the Eurasian tectonic plates are pulling apart. So you get this remarkable seismic activity and such. In Reykjavik Harbor, now Reykjavik, the word means smoky bay. And really what we've got is, I think it's a VOG, V-O-G, that volcanic fog you might see around the south of the big island of Hawaii when there's active volcanoes and other parts of the Pacific Rim circle of fire. It's often, it looks cloudy, but it's really this VOG. Point being, Reykjavik means smoky bay. This is a gorgeous sculpture called the Sun Voyager. And the cool thing about this is it changes in color based on the light of the day, from sort of a silvery to a kind of a gold. And it strikes me as sort of like alchemy there on the shores of the harbor. This is just a ridiculous photo that I love. This is from the Saga Museum in Reykjavik. And what I like, this is a dummy. And next to the dummy, this is a wax mannequin. Okay, pause for laughter and applause. Thank you. No, but seriously, this is me with next to a Viking mannequin. And that makes me laugh because our teeth are very, very similar. So perhaps I do have some true Viking blood in my lineage, although I haven't had the test done yet. Let's carry on from Iceland. Following Eric the Red, he has another dispute with another neighbor. Another neighbor of Eric's is, well, dead. Simple as that. And he was banished yet again and goes to South Greenland, where he will raise his family, daughter and 3 boys. And we know most famously his daughter Freya, as well as his son, Leif Erikson. So let's go there together. We're heading into the south corner of Greenland. And I give you another map picture just to give you a feel for just how rugged this is. It's fjords, it's a tiny sliver of arable land. It abuts right up against glacier. You can see why it might feel familiar to folks from Norway with these fjords and such. I flew into Narsarsuaq, and the reason that was the most accessible point for me to go to Eric the Red's farmstead, which is where Leif Erikson was born. Across the way here, this is Eric's Fjord and Einar's Fjord. Across the water, and I trekked across that mountain ridgeline into the next pocket of land, got a boat across the way. Iglaku was also called Gardar in the day, was the Norse bishopric where they had basically an abbey. And this thriving community lasted until early in the 15th century and then was abandoned. So there's a little bit of a mystery there, and a bit of a, like as we'd say in writing, an ellipses. There's sort of a ... and a whole lot of question marks. Well, this is the aerial view from the plane as I'm flying into Greenland, right? Icebergs, bergy bits breaking off this glacier. You can see inland, it's stark. There's a wonderful quote from a travel writer who I love, and they say, in equal parts, Greenland is terrifying and beautiful. And that's exactly what I felt as I flew in there. It's a bit terrified, but yeah, absolute beauty. Here is a replica of Eric the Red's farmstead. Eric and his spouse, Thorhilda, this is where they raised their 4 kids. Pardon me, a replica of that. Here it is. I like this shot because you can see the icebergs right there. This is in the middle of summer, and it is cold and it's intimidating and bleak, but there's still a beauty there. This is pretty decent grazing ground. They raised sheep and such. In the day, here's a close-up. This is a little church, replica of the church that Eric the Red built for Leif's mom, Thorhilda. She was Christian, he was not. So Leif Erikson's dad worshipped the old gods. Leif's mom worshipped Jesus, embraced Christianity. But you see, like, it's built of slabs of rock, replicating the brick, sod, turf, and peat. Wood was precious. Around Greenland, there's no trees to speak of. The odd scrawny rowan tree and the odd weeping willow. So they were reliant on annual ships coming from Europe, from Iceland, and driftwood. And that was, they would build a settlement where things would accumulate. So when you're sailing, you throw a piece of wood in the water. This is an old mariner's trick. And you watch to see where it lands on shore. And you can follow currents and tides and increase your likelihood of accumulating some precious, precious driftwood, not only for building and repairing ships, for travel and hunting and fishing, but shelter, burning in the winter for heat. Wood was probably one of the most precious commodities next to food. And just up the hill from the farmstead, this is a statue of Leif Erikson. Leif, of course, tends to get a top billing, and more so than Eric the Red with his violent past. Leif seemed to take over after his mom. He was Christian, and as well as going a Viking to explore and settle, they were all often looking for converting what they'd consider heathens or pagans. That was often part of their journeys at that time from the year 1000 onwards. And here I am on a 1940s boat, mostly wood, built like an ark, big reinforced bulbous hull, not unlike Roald Amundsen's boat, the Fram, that he sailed around both North and South Poles. And this is just us sailing through some of those fjords I showed you on the earlier slide on the map. And I could just spend a day looking at these icebergs, like cloud gazing, kind of magical, really places where they're massive, and you see the colors. And yeah, true blue and this and that. This is the hook on the ship, is either we were pulling up against or pushing off some of these icebergs. They used to use the term bergy bits and growlers based on their size and shape. But again, gorgeous conditions. And what you do is, this is with a bucket and a rope, pulled up a teeny little bit of ice from the sea. So I got some 10-year-old booze with 1 million year old ice from the glacier. And what's rather fun is the things that gave those icebergs their color is this ice is full of oxygen. And you can honestly see at times every color of the rainbow in this glacial ice. So it's fully oxygenated. You let a bit of this natural glacial ice melt and it releases the oxygen and it carbonates your drink. You put your ear up to it and you hear it fizzing. And it's one of the neatest little scientific things, more fun than baking soda and vinegar. And there I am enjoying my drink. I show you this one, the glacier's back there. I show you this to give you a feel for, I'm wearing everything out of my backpack here. You see, I got a toque over my cap. I got 5 layers there, double pants, beautiful day, and I am still freezing. It is very, very icy. We better just follow now from Eric the Red and Leif Erikson's birthplace. We got to do justice and go to Vinland here. We were fairly confident that Leif went to Baffin Island probably, and Labrador, and then made that settlement at that extreme northwestern tipper corner of Newfoundland. And there's enough archaeological evidence that we know darn well that the Norse were there. There was iron smelting facilities. So that's where I went. Here's the rugged Atlantic coast of Newfoundland, iceberg in there. This is still the middle of June, but just around the corner, again in Newfoundland, gorgeous, pristine beaches. To us, West Coast Canada, it felt to me very, not unlike Tofino or even that Oregon coast. You could see it just be so ideal to land a long ship on a place like that. And from there, this around the corner, more or less, from Leif's settlement at Lansau Meadows, Newfoundland. This is Port Anthony. Look at this, middle of June, packed with ice. Now, this is a fishing community, also reliant on tourism. So this was a real concern. I mean, we weren't sure if they were going to have a season, as it were. So beautiful as it is, that was a troubling, a stressful one. This is what Leif Erikson's settlement looks like now. It's melted back to the ground because it was turf and wood. And so it just bumps in the ground now. But this is what it was like when they built it right around the year 1000. Sod, peat, turf, a little bit of precious wood for the chimneys and a lintel. And they figured this longhouse, a little bit of pen, would have been for wildlife. Maybe 60 to 90 folks lived in this settlement, 5 full winters, so 5 years in Newfoundland. And a river runs up just out of the shot here. And one of the things that's documented in the sagas is, although these were, experienced, well-traveled, knowledgeable anglers, fishers, hunters, it's documented they'd never seen salmon so big as they saw in Newfoundland. And of course, some of the game was very new to them. They came from a place of reindeer, but all of a sudden these caribou and elk and moose were seemingly like a monstrous as well. I share this one with you because it made me laugh. This was in a rental car, driving north on the Viking trail through Newfoundland and Labrador, and punched in the coordinates, and it just said, take your next right in 400 kilometers. That was the next fork in the road. So if you've done it, you know it. If you're planning on doing it, it's a great big landmass, Newfoundland, beautiful, welcoming, and you allow lots of time. And of course, I had a chum in the UK share this one with me, someone customizing their vehicle with a Viking head. And of course, I have to share with you a Gary Larson Far Side, where he says the Viking long car was once the scourge of European roadways. And of course, his dragon-headed long car has the bumper sticker, I don't break for Saxons, as only Gary Larson could do. And I conclude that with, now, Jacob, you may have seen, shared this online as part of our planning and promotion and preparation for tonight. And you see this, and you can probably tell all of these statues of Leif Erikson. You can tell I took these photos in the autumn, and you know why? Because you can tell when the leaves are turning red. Oh dear. And this is the, there's some more product placement. I'm sure this is the stage of the evening when you're thinking to yourself, oh, with those jokes, can we get our money back? No, you can't. I will give you a little more reading before we open things up to some Q&A and get Jacob to join us back on screen again. I may as well jump into a little bit of Gone Viking 2, Beyond Boundaries, where I start the second book with the epilogue from the first book. And it goes like this: an epilogue to Gone Viking, a travel saga, kicking off Gone Viking 2, Beyond Boundaries. And you'll see welcoming questions as we go. Please feel free to jump in. Let me share this passage with you from Gone Viking 2, Beyond Boundaries. Back home, following 8 years of travel, exploration, and research, 8 years of Viking or voyaging the Northern Hemisphere in the wake of some of the world's most adventurous explorers, I was enjoying a Vancouver view, water, mountains, the bustle of tugs, tankers, and helijets, all plying sea and sky. Hillside homes reflected sun in bursts of fiery gold, and beyond the bay where inlet sprawls into ocean, bulkers glowed in morning light. Moored sailboats pinged a rhythmic and nautical tintinnabulation, a toe-tapping score as a solitary freighter slid west beneath the big green bridge, bound for who knows where, maybe Avalon. Over the pole, Icelandic horses were changing color with the season, akin to amber leaves now littering the city. And I thought of a sign that resonated on Haida Gwaii, hidden in forest. Do not look back, it read. There is much more to see, feel, and love. While a bench in a park near our home is embossed with a plaque that states, if you're gonna look back, laugh. So I think that's a good amount of reading and photos. Now I'm gonna welcome Jacob back and see if we've got any questions. We'll open it up to that.
All right. So yeah, there's a bunch of questions. So Heather wrote, she was wondering, what was the wooden structure in the site in Greenland with the church? It looked like an entry arbor of sorts. Was it decorative or did it have a practical function?
It's not clearly defined. So I've got a theory on that. Traditionally in the old pagan Viking longhouses, that lintel was a key structure. They would literally use it and perhaps raise someone to look beyond, from outwards to in, and they would use it for some of their pagan rituals. A seer could be looking into the afterlife or catching a glimpse of Valhalla. And so there was a lot of symbolism behind that. Obviously, that wasn't the premise for this Christian structure. So I think it transitioned more to decorative, but there's also, they may well have done some sort of a cleansing prior to crossing that threshold. That little chapel is weensy, maybe Torhilda and the kids could have squeezed in there for like a little reading or service or prayer. It wasn't like a place where you're going to have a congregation. So it's probably decorative, but part of me thinks it's a nod to the old ways. There's a great story from the sagas that Eric the Red and Torhilda, the spouses, quibbled and quabbled over that. She wanted a church and he didn't buy into it. And in the sagas, it says, she said, oh, okay, if you don't build me a church, you're never welcome back to bed again. And to which he promptly built her a church. So it almost smacks of a sitcom, but apparently this is how it played out. So part of me thinks, did he build the church, but with a little bit of a nod to the old gods? Not really sure. So it's all speculation, but we know from the old round posts and the lumps and archaeologically, it looked pretty much like that 1,000 years ago. Long answer without a clear answer, but thank you for that question.
Thank you. Hoda was just commenting that she was visited the northern Labrador villages. Cool. And she just commented that they were very impressive.
It's a beautiful part of the world, and we had this serendipitous experience. My wife and I at a little restaurant there. So George Decker was the name of the local fisherman in the 1950s. He steered the Norwegian couples, Ingsteds, to the site of what they later archaeologically realized was Leif Erikson's settlement. The locals there thought it was probably like an indigenous site, Beatuk or Micmac. But then when they realized, oh no, there was a Norse brooch pin and like I say, a clear iron smelting facility, they realized, oh, that was a site. So my long-winded backstory is the fact that at this restaurant we're visiting with a local, and she was the granddaughter of George Decker. She said, yeah, Grandpa always talked about when those modern day Vikings came. And so historically, it was a bit of a watershed, and just making that connection in present day felt serendipitous and extra special. But I agree, it is a gorgeous part of the planet.
There's a question about the pagan traditions and if they persist, or what exactly were the Vikings practicing in their spiritual? It sounds like there was a mix of Christianity at some point. And
yeah, it's an interesting transition. So if we think of the Scandinavian countries, and depending on who you ask, you get different answers, more or less. I think technically it's Denmark and Norway and Sweden, but Iceland and Finland are often categorized. Point being, Christianity was sweeping Western Europe in the 10th century. And King Harold Bluetooth, King of Denmark, was a great example in the late 900s. It was very clear to him, why in heaven's name would we fight? Like, no one wants to waste life resources on warfare unnecessarily. So Denmark was sort of ahead of the curve. They embraced Christianity. It was the official religion, but it was as much a political move as anything. But again, it was like one of those ones, hey, you worship who you choose to, just don't make a big deal about it. We're Christian officially. So no other Christian nation or a king or warlord is, chances are they're probably not going to look to invade, because often invasions were under the guise of, well, we got to save souls. But invariably it was linked to good trade routes or good resources, stuff like that. Norway jumped on board as well late in the 10th century. And as I said, Iceland, they did it at what they called the All-Thing, the thing where they would literally meet like a legislative assembly. And in the year 1000, they said the country is officially Christian. Sweden, however, is a great example. They held on to the pagan ways officially for another 2 centuries before they sort of got on board with what was clearly a trend.
And do some of the original pagan traditions persist at all, or have they vanished?
Yes. I mean, there are midsummer festivals that happen all over the place. I got in on a midsummer festival in the UK, where that's a very pagan thing. Now, mine was just a bunch of individuals watching a gorgeous sunset, the first one of summer, the last one of the solstice or the equinox. Pardon me, so it was summer solstice is what it was. But we were just admiring nature. But some folks would might dance around like druids and clothing optional and treat it like a proper old school a pagan druidic rite, R-I-T-E. But there's a wonderful Icelandic expression where they still to this day, many of them say, why disbelieve anything? It could all be true. And there have been roadways in Iceland that they will divert around the places where the Huldufolk, the hidden people, are believed to inhabit. And there's a great story of laying track for a highway, and there's a big old rock, and people knew it was occupied by the spirits. Well, this is still progress, and machinery, every piece of machinery that they brought to take down that rock broke down again, and again. And then the engineers said, the heck with that, and they rerouted the road. Why disbelieve anything? So there's still lots of things where folks are very comfy maintaining facets of that. Like I say, I love that the Christian church is just across the street from Odin's Street and Thor Avenue, Thor's Road, Mm-hmm.
Thank you. You mentioned a phrase, I think I heard this correctly. You said, making my bones, for me. Yeah, what is that?
Oh, earning your stripes. That was modern vernacular, but it does come from an old, I don't know the origins of that word.
Okay. I thought it might be like a Viking phrase or something.
Etymology, I'm ignorant. I used jargon, but the idea being, in the day, if you could do something that would warrant, and Jacob, you and I know, both songwriters, if a bard wants to write about you or create a poem or sing about you, you've done something worthy. That was, often a motivator for immortality. But basically it just meant going abroad to earn your keep. Now, generally speaking, in Scandinavia, these were prosperous, healthy, growing nations that were running out of arable land. So a lot of these young explorers, a majority for a spell would have been male, going abroad, looking for a new place to emigrate, maybe find, create a home, make a family, maybe get some wealth, that kind of a thing. But it was very much, there was a great deal of gender equality amongst many of the nations comparatively at that time. So you would have women and men sailing elsewhere to make a new life and find new arable land and make a living. Immigration, no different than we see today all over the world.
Thank you. There was a question from Robert. What was your most challenging experience during your travels?
To Robert, thank you. The time on the pilot cutter when we lost the sail and the engine, that was, I'm a novice on a sailor, and trying to remember knots as you're being bucketed with seawater. We were never too far from land. I did for a moment think we were going to die, but it was very intimidating. And that was an interesting one. And then another entirely on my own, having to trek over that ridgeline in Greenland that I spoke of to get to what was that bishopric. A boat takes you only so far, then you're on your own, and I mean on your own. So I did a proper trek, and you're very cognizant, feeling utterly, you have to be self-reliant. You're taking care not to turn an ankle, that kind of a thing. But again, that terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. and utterly worthwhile. There's another old travel literature quote. It says, once you've seen the world, there's always Greenland. And at first it struck me as does that feel like a little pretentious if I even say that line? But the fact of the matter is, it still kind of gave me, shivers thinking about that. And I did have some spectacular experiences there, but that was demanding. That I felt no margin for error. I'm not a mountain climber, but that to me was it pushed my limits somewhat.
Well, that's extraordinary. I don't think I know that I've never been that remote or alone. That's a pretty interesting experience. Anna asked, so what's the weirdest piece of Viking history or trivia you've learned?
At the risk of being vulgar, I got to bring it back to York in the UK. And if you know that community, it's roughly in the center of Britain, but it's northern England, more or less. And it was definitely the Viking capital of Britain. Whether or not you watch a Viking TV series, Ivar the Boneless, one of Ragnar Lothbrok's offspring, ran that community. So York for a number of years. It's a spectacular historical town. But there's great Viking history there specifically. And one of the exhibits sponsored by Lloyd's of London is a piece of poo that archaeologists have pulled from a midden. And as silly as it may sound, historically we can glean a lot from culture, hygiene, crops, animal husbandry, and this and that by looking at a piece of poop. So there is an exhibit there, prominent under lights, sponsored by Lloyd's Bank, and of course it's called the Lloyd's Bank turd. And it was surreal because I'm on my own, but I'm sort of adjacent to a bit of a group, and I had this moment where I realized, good Lord, there's a group of us that have traveled across the world, and we're standing around looking at something that should be flushed, but of course we're analyzing it as though it's something very, very special. There it is. I've said it. That's the oddest one. It's historically significant, but you don't stop to think about it too much.
Sounds like it could be an avant-garde artwork or something.
Indeed.
Meliko is wondering about if there's any interesting food or unusual foods that you enjoy.
Yeah, and again, with Iceland being so accessible now, many folks are getting this access to this kind of experience. I did a little Viking food tour around the Reykjavik region, and one you'll see on travel shows as well, the Greenlandic shark. Now it was historically significant. You catch one of these things, it's the size of a whale shark, like the size of an orca, but it's sort of an omnivorous fish. So it's got teeth. They eat anything and everything. If a fisher person lands one of these things, you can feed the village for a while. But they would air dry these things. First off, they would bury it, and then some of its toxins would come out. So it's basically rotting as it's tenderizing under the earth. Then they hang it and dry it for several months, and they still do this historically, chop it up, feed it to the tourists. And that was unlike anything, and you can always liken it. Oh, is it like chicken? This was just like chewing away on fishy gum, and it never ever gives. After you get tired or bored, you swallow it. Usually folks are taking it with a shot of booze because it kind of kills the taste. But that air-dried fermented Greenlandic shark was an odd one. A common tasty one that many of us aren't used to was horse meat. That was which, however we view different things differently in different parts of the world. But that, taking it back to the earlier question, that was considered heathenism. That was a pagan practice, eating horse meat, but it's still very much a thing there.
Yeah. I had a question. What was it? Oh, right. I had read, I remember reading some time ago, it was like a book called Eyewitness to History. And it was like firsthand accounts of things that had happened, and from eyewitnesses. And there was one description of like a Viking, like a human sacrifice. And they sacrificed somebody and then they pushed them out to in the water. And there was this whole kind of ceremony. And it was like quite terrifying, actually, the whole description. But I'm just curious, like, if you've read about or know about that and what they were doing, why they were, what that meant.
Yeah, there's quite a few interesting examples. Ahmed ibn Fadlan, an Arabic scribe, very well traveled, some of our best historical references to Vikings. He documents some of that stuff. To me, part of me questions, like sacrifice, a lot of this then would have been written about again later, hearsay, by Christian monks, where the whole rationale behind afterlife and soul and spirit and heaven and would be very different than a pagan perspective. And I can't help but think that many of those people that were being sacrificed were all too happy to be chosen to have a fast track to their good place, as it were, or to accompany perhaps queens and kings into Valhalla. So there are these kinds of things. Often soldiers, along with livestock at Uppsala, they would have these rites, these ceremonies every few years where they'd be hung from the trees. It was very honorable. Parents, if one of your offspring was chosen to be amongst the sacrificed, it reflected very well on the house and the lineage. So there are these kinds of things. Another good example is there's a classic grave where we've revealed the remains of two women, and one older, one younger. And we're not really sure yet if the younger was royalty and the older might have been an attendant, or vice versa. And then it brings into question, well, did they pass at the same time? Or was their dear friend and companion, did they opt to join them on their, and we're seeing now lots of evidence now where there might be burning and burying, like a sort of a hybrid type of interment.
Interesting. So just one last question, because we're getting to the time, but I was curious where your interest in this originated. Like, was this something you were always like passionate about, or something piqued your interest? Or
I had just been, I had been a travel writer for some time, and but that my eureka moment was in that Viking ship museum in Roskilde in Denmark, when I saw that world map, and I thought, oh wow, a person could spend their life just tracking and plotting these places and visiting these wonderful historic sites all over the Northern Hemisphere and still just be scratching the surface from a research and sightseeing perspective, and then making it as adventurous as you choose to embrace. That was the moment. And just being a water baby from the West Coast and loving getting onto any sort of craft on the water. And, you know, there's probably that inner child in me that always thinks, hey, you know, if I can't be an astronaut or a race car driver, maybe I can still be a Viking.
You know, when you were just speaking and you were describing how the land masses used to be connected, and you'd said, well, what if they were connected? That's kind of how you phrased it before you described it. And I had this sort of like little light bulb moment when you, because I realized in that moment that even today, like they were masters of the sea, right? And sailing. So in a way, like the lands were connected because they were so comfortable with the waterways.
Mm-hmm. And you can even see that with some of the old maps. They looked at the water as roadways.
Right.
Those were, that was the joining means. That wasn't the great blue yonder.
Right.
That was the roadway. It was as familiar and natural as us taking the Trans-Canada.
Yeah, and so watching your presentation, I really could see, like when you were like that the map which you showed was like all this northern region, right? And I'm so used to seeing, the map of like, the equator kind of view. And it's like they're seeing the world from the water and from this very northern spot, and connecting across like the ocean. So it's like a whole different view of the world, actually.
Yes, I had another moment like that. There's a museum called the Kelvin Grove in Glasgow, Old Norse Norwegian map, where that's the center of the world and everything fanned out. Shetland, Faroes, Iceland. That was, of course, the perspective. If you were standing on a shore in southwest Norway, that's how you think of it, rather than the North Pole, this and down
Right.
from this.
Exactly. So fascinating. So I want to just thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And this has been quite a journey into the world of the Vikings. And it's been kind of an interesting couple of years without so much travel. So it's kind of exciting to get a travel vision. And I want to just remind everyone, the books Gone Viking 1 and Gone Viking 2 are available from Banyen, banyen.com, banyen.com. And you can learn more about Bill's work at billarnott.aps.wordpress.com. So just on behalf of Banyen Books, thank you all for coming tonight. And thank you, Bill.
And Jacob, I'll make anyone an offer if they find a copy that they're at Banyen that they're excited about and they're local. Do not hesitate to reach out. I'd be thrilled to get a signature in there for you as well. And because, as you know, Banyen Books and Sound is one of my favorite stores. And I also say thanks for everyone that's been here tonight and for making me feel so welcome, Jacob.
Thank you. That's a generous offer. So have a good night, everyone, and thanks.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyen Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyen Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyen.com.